together for 23 years. They've kept their vision despite great adversity, death, depression, addiction. These guys have seen it all. They found salvation in music and brought their lewd and funky gospel to the masses. They share a love of sunshine, tattoos, and tube socks. So the question is, how did this irreverent gang of four go from attending after-school detentions to throwing after-show parties? The Red Hot Chili Peppers were born to be.
My mother always wanted me to be a lawyer.
A doctor.
An architect like my father.
My dad insisted on medical school.
I was always expected to be a part of the family business.
A bank manager.
But
I was born to be.
The phenomenon known as the Red Hot Chili Peppers had its beginnings in the late 70s in the City of Angels. At LA's Fairfax High School, two teenage outsiders, Anthony Kiedis and Michael Balzary, began a lifelong friendship.
The universe, gave me this friend, and it wasn't a friend that you get for a day or two or a week or two or a year or two. It seems to be a friend that you get for life.
They shared a rebellious spirit and an affinity for landing on the wrong side of the law. Both boys came from broken homes. Michael Balzary, born in Australia, moved to LA when he was 11 with his mother, sister, and jazz-playing stepdad. Anthony Kiedis moved to LA when he was around the same age, coming from Michigan to live with his divorced dad, John Kiedis, who also went by the name Blackie Dammit.
I grew up in Michigan until I was 11, and I used to visit my father in the early 70s, late 60s, and the early 70s. It was such a dynamic place to visit my dad. I was like, wow, this world is just booming with magic and intensity, and I was so attracted to it when I finally moved there, and it's quite a lot to handle as a young man.
Having been born in the Midwest and move out to California, it's kind of the classic let's go to California and discover our dream kind of a situation.
Blackie was a part-time actor and a full-time drug smuggler.
It's affected me deeply as a person in more ways than I care to account for.
And if you want these kind of dreams, it's Californication.
It wasn't all bad because Blackie was well known in the star-studded Hollywood club scene. And by 14, Kiedis had met such musical luminaries as Keith Moon, Led Zeppelin, and Alice Cooper.
My friends were so mystified by my growing up in a household where the parents were kind of like my best friends instead of parents.
Back at Fairfax High, they met another troublemaker, Israeli-born Hillel Slovak, who was a budding young guitarist. The trio wreaked havoc wherever they went, flashing old ladies, breaking into houses, and partying at all hours of the night.
I mean, I used to break into shows all the time when I was a kid because I couldn't afford a ticket. I thought, I have to get everything I can for myself because nobody else is going to take care of me.
Influenced by the thriving LA punk scene that produced such seminal groups as the Germs and Black Flag, forming a band seemed like a natural progression for Kiedis and Balzary.
The level of intensity was so wild and so just off the hook that I was almost scared.
Michael Balzary was an accomplished trumpet player from an early age, taking a cue from his jazz musician stepfather. His innate musical ability came in handy when Slovak started teaching him bass guitar. Kiedis was writing poetry and setting it to the music they created.
Ever since I was a kid, my specialty was kind of writing. I mean, that's what came naturally to me was words.
Soon the trio picked up a drummer named Jack Irons, and so began their musical odyssey.
Even when we had only played one or two shows, Flea and I used to go to clubs and kind of insist that we were the best band in the world. And people would be like, do you have a record? And we're like, no, but we've played 2 shows, and come and see us next Thursday. It's going to be the greatest thing you've ever seen.
Around the time the band began performing as Red Hot Chili Peppers, their energetic and gymnastic bassist, Balzary, changed his name to Flea. The band began developing their live show on the strip club circuit on Sunset Boulevard. Drawing inspiration from their surroundings, it was at one such club that the feisty young Peppers debuted their infamous socks-only attire.
We've really always been the masters of low fashion, of no fashion, of low dog, low brow, get a hoe fashion.
Performing naked except for strategically placed socks, the gimmick caught on and soon became a recurring part of their ever more provocative live show.
We just don't shy away from our dicks, you know, because there's no reason to.
Yeah, it's different before you become known as a musician, as a band. You know, you can really be loud and bodacious.
Later that year, the boisterous band's progressive sound and reputation as a fearsome live act landed them an EMI record contract. But the deal was not enough to keep the young band united. Slovak and Irons left to focus on their own band called What Is This? Kiedis and Flea were left to find substitute members for their first major recording session.
You know, we've always concentrated on music. You know, it's always been of vital importance to us, and it's always been the thing that made us do everything that we do, and the core and the reason for our whole being is playing music.
The Chili Peppers released their self-titled debut in 1984. The album failed to capture the essence of their energetic live shows and was not a commercial success.
The thing is, does anybody really care what anybody thinks?
Well, I don't know, do you?
No.
Well, you know, to me, we get kind of two kinds of reviews. We get the reviews of the people that really like us, and then every once in a while we get these reviews of people saying, oh, well, they're white and they're trying to be black, or something like that.
I was in an elevator with a record company guy, and it's when we couldn't seem to sell a record, and he was going on about how the Beastie Boys came roaring out of the box like lions, selling records like hotcakes. And we were like, geez, how the hell did they do that? We can't even get played on the radio.
But their underground following remained, and college radio backed the new sounds.
Yes, college radio. College radio is where it's at.
In 1985, Slovak returned to the group, and the trio, along with replacement drummer Cliff Martinez, recorded their sophomore effort, Freaky Styley, with funk all-star George Clinton as producer.
I said, hey, George, what do you say you produce that album?
And he said, what do you say you give me $25,000 right now?
And you said,
let's do it.
And then next thing you know, we weren't even really considering the black and white thing at all, like that. You know, it wasn't really a racial thing at all. It was more like a just get down with George kind of feel.
Later that year, Martinez left the band. But it was the return of Jack Irons in 1986 that gave the Chili Peppers their first good crack at the chart.
The new band is actually the old band back together.
Right, it's the original lineup, including Jack Irons on drums, Hillel Slovak on guitar, the Israeli cowboy who can't be stopped, and my Feast of McBean, the Dream Team on bass guitar, and myself, Antoine Swan, on vocals.
Well, it's always a little burst of energy when you get someone back, you know, but I mean, we always kept the fire burning the whole time through.
I am here today to talk about the uplift party plan. A plan based on a band based on a plan. There should be no slaves in the Netherlands. The Hollywood Town.
Their third album, The Uplift Mofo Party Plan, released in 1987, was more focused and was the first to feature all the original members. It was also the last. Years of recreational drug use had turned into a painful addiction for guitarist Hillel Slovak. Sadly, on June 25, 1988, Slovak overdosed on heroin and was found dead in his home.
Hillel dying is definitely a strong memory.
Yeah, and we've all experienced tragic loss, and you basically have to appreciate everyone, in particular the love of the people that you care about.
Devastated by the loss of his friend, Irons left the band shortly afterwards.
When he died, I think the last thing that either of us thought about was the band. I mean, we thought about our friend.
It was once again up to Anthony Kiedis and Flea to keep the dream alive or let it slip away. When we come back, the kindred spirits face the most difficult decision of their lives, battle their own demons, and put their trust in a teenage prodigy. When Born to Be continues. Red Hot Chili Peppers brought funk rock to dizzying new heights. 4 young rebel-rousers came together to buck the system and were on the cusp of major success when guitarist Hillel Slovak died of a heroin overdose in 1988. Drummer Jack Irons left the band shortly after, and Kiedis and Flea were left to pick up the pieces and address their own shortcomings. Kiedis and Flea had invested too much to give up, even with the loss of half their band. They began seeking out new players to join them and found Chad Smith to man the drum kit.
He's about twice as loud as any other German.
I like that.
John Frusciante, a die-hard Peppers fan, had no band experience when he introduced himself to Kiedis and Flea. Initially, they recommended the 18-year-old to another band for an audition. But once they heard him play, they knew he was right for the Peppers.
I can't imagine any feeling being more proud than how I felt when I joined on that day, just to be a part of what they had been up to that point.
Out of the hard times came hope and excitement. The newly formed combo charged ahead and recorded a 4th album. Released in 1989, Mother's Milk was a combination of past experiences and the refreshing rebirth of the band.
You know, we've been playing music for about 6 or 7 years as the band, and we're just now getting to a point where the world at large is pretty much ready to accept us.
Singles included a chilling tribute to Slovak, Knock Me Down, which provided the first hit for the band.
It's basically a heart-to-heart rendition of a relationship that I had with that guitar player who died, and just how I was feeling about the whole situation.
And a funk rock rendition of Stevie Wonder's exuberant Higher Ground.
With that song, Higher Ground, the lyrical content of the song, I think, is particularly relevant to what's going on. I mean, especially with our band has been through, and what's going on with the band and what's going on in the world all around us.
In 1991, the band switched to Warner Records.
Well, it was a very smart idea going from EMI to Warner Brothers, I'll tell you, because being at EMI, the whole time we were at EMI, I was thinking to myself, is it really this bad being on a record label?
Red Hot Chili Peppers moved into a rented LA mansion with mega producer Rick Rubin and recorded what was to become one of the most exalted albums in rock history, Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
I think you got a sense that the songs we were writing were very warm and gritty and funky and dirty, and they didn't belong to go into a studio.
Straight from the heart, real shit. You know, I mean, it's an emotional record that we made, and I'm really proud of it. We covered a lot of emotional territory, and there's a lot of varieties of sounds and moods, and it's all real.
The album spawned back-to-back hits, helped in part by the provocative and inventive videos, like Give It Away, in which the band appears clad in metallic paint, and Little Else.
Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
It reminds me a lot of the TV show Lost in Space. It's like Billy Mummy, like if he painted himself silver and took like 11 hits of acid and went for a trip with the robot out into the desert and ran into some philosophers, which would be us. That's what the video is kind of like.
At the album's core lay a song that is still resonant today.
Sometimes I feel like I don't have a partner.
Under the Bridge was written by Kiedis about his own struggle with drug use and was his attempt to represent the flip side to life in the fast lane.
I don't ever wanna feel like I did that day.
I was fascinated by the luxury of that lifestyle for many years.
You know, we're not a band that I think worries about having limits, you know, musically or physically or any which way. We just do whatever we want whenever we want to.
The temptation of the rock star lifestyle was overwhelming, and things took a turn for the worse. History appeared to be repeating itself. While on tour promoting Blood Sugar Sex Magic, John Frusciante developed a deep dislike for the Chili Peppers' new superstar status.
I just had a different image of myself, and I wanted to be a club band still.
Became addicted to heroin and cocaine, and in 1992, he abruptly left the band.
Before I quit, we weren't getting along well, you know. It being successful and each of us reacting a different way to it had made us to where we weren't friends anymore. I had a most distorted, warped image of who I was.
Frusciante wasn't the only one dangerously involved in drugs. Both Kiedis and Flea were nursing functional addictions of their own, and the philandering macho lifestyle was bound to catch up with them sometime. The question on everyone's mind was, were the Chili Peppers' days numbered? Was the end in sight? When we come back, Red Hot Chili Peppers enter a period of uncertainty. Watch as they take a leap of faith and make a pact to stay together at any cost. When Born to Be continues. Red Hot Chili Peppers will go down in history as a highly influential band that changed the course of modern rock music. Their unique sound is comprised of 4 individuals whose creative chemistry is unparalleled and often imitated. But a string of tragedies, including the death of original guitarist Hillel Slovak and the abrupt exit and subsequent drug addiction of his replacement, John Frusciante, had left the remaining members reeling.
My friends are so depressed.
It's a miserable experience, you know, and a lot of times if I would have had the guts, I would have quit, you know.
In 1993, the band hired former Jane's Addiction guitarist Dave Navarro to accompany them on tour and join them for their much-delayed 1995 follow-up to Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Dave Navarro, ladies and gentlemen, the handsomest man in rock right here.
And when Dave first joined the band, it was awkward at first.
I don't compare them, and what he adds is Dave.
The resulting album, One Hot Minute, was well received, but didn't come close to the success of its predecessor.
I like pleasure, spike with pain, and music is my aeroplane. It's my aeroplane.
In 1998, citing creative differences, Dave Navarro and the Red Hot Chili Peppers parted ways.
You know, the thing is that we're dealing with so many distinct different personalities with different aesthetic tastes.
Meanwhile, John Frusciante had cleaned up his act after nearly 6 years of debilitating drug addiction.
None of the hardships like losing money or losing my talent, or none of those things really made me want to stop.
After an unsuccessful stint in rehab, the talented musician decided to quit drugs cold turkey on his own.
Waking up in the morning, knowing who you are, looking in the mirror and being happy with what you see, you know, and going on with your day as yourself, having a clear image of who you are, you know.
When Kiedis and Flea heard about Frusciante's return from death's doorstep, they immediately offered him a place back in the band. Older, wiser, and ready for the perils of the rock star life, Frusciante accepted.
It feels damn good, and I don't know if you heard the sound check, but John is very musically inspiring individual.
Inspired by his old comrade's victory over drugs, Kiedis kicked his habit for good.
Addiction is terrifying, you know, because you can't imagine ever stopping. Getting out of that state of mind, getting out of that lifestyle is actually pretty exciting.
With the Chili Peppers back in action, they set about recording 1999's Californication. This time out, the band, under Frusciante's guidance, went for stronger melodies and layered harmonies.
We had to actually go through everything we did in the last 8 years for this record to have meaning and to exist.
But the album was also a return to the sound they became famous for. And the result was a massive hit with both diehard Chili Peppers devotees and a whole new generation of fans.
to me, it's just a complete journal of about a year's worth of good times.
Frusciante! John Anthony Frusciante!
Frusciante had been the missing link for the band, and with him back in the mix, the guys were more creative and energized than ever before.
Fantastic, man!
Fantastic, man!
Every time it's the four of us standing on a stage together, like doing a sound check or whatever, it just always feels like magic to me. You know?
Grounded, clean, and happy, the foursome hit the road running.
It's sweat on time, it's sweat on time, it's sweat on time, it's sweat on time. Looking fine, you're looking down and good, not to down and nice.
Back in LA, the band recorded By the Way, which was released in 2001.
Standing in line to see the show tonight, and there's a light on, heavy glow.
You hear that, kids? If you love Californication, you're gonna love By the Way. Get it now!
The band has been moving along happily together since those days. Every member of the group has turned to some form of spirituality to keep them afloat whenever the temptations of Hollywood get too strong.
Prayer and meditation kind of become, you know, the 1-2 punch, and I think it's really good for you.
Fly away on my cell phone. I feel it more than ever.
In 2004, the Peppers got back to work on their 9th studio album. Released in May of 2006, the final product, a double album called Stadium Arcadium, is regarded as their strongest work yet.
One could say such things, and it wouldn't be horribly untrue.
The record skyrocketed to the top of the charts, giving the band a brand new experience in their 23-year-long career, a #1 album.
People will always gravitate towards something that is real and sounds good and serves the purpose of real music. It's just always going to be.
These days, the guys are on tour, continuing their epic journey. The physically fit foursome shows no signs of slowing down. If anything, they're just warming up.
I can't imagine not having made the journey. You know, it's impossible for me to imagine that none of this stuff would have ever happened. And really, I feel like we've just sort of scratched the surface. And, you know, maybe our best is yet to come, and we could be more at the beginning than the end.
After all, this is a band that has experienced death, addiction, desolation, and heartache, only to come back again and again, inspired and ready to turn obstacles into opportunities. Red Hot Chili Peppers were born to be.
What color are your underwear?
I forget.
What color are check?
I can't know. Tell you after.
Who's getting younger?
The groupies, yeah. We bring strollers to our shows now just to make sure they get home safely.
Stroller access.
You know, we don't want any accidents.
Madonna does this prayer circle. Madonna? What a turd burglar.
Every day, I think my life is full of weird, absurd moments. This could be one of them.
Slovak, who was a budding young guitarist. The trio wreaked havoc wherever they went, flashing old ladies, breaking into houses, and partying at all hours of the night.
I mean, I used to break into shows all the time when I was a kid because I couldn't afford a ticket. I thought, I have to get everything I can for myself because nobody else is going to take care of me.
Influenced by the thriving LA punk scene that produced such seminal groups as the Germs and Black Flag, forming a band seemed like a natural progression for Kiedis and Balzary.
The level of intensity was so wild and so just off the hook that I was almost scared.
Michael Balzary was an accomplished trumpet player from an early age, taking a cue from his jazz musician stepfather. His innate musical ability came in
handy. And move out to California. It's kind of the classic, let's go to California and discover our dream kind of a situation.
Blackie was a part-time actor and a full-time drug smuggler.
It's affected me deeply as a person in more ways than I care to account for.
And if you want these kind of dreams, it's Californication.
It wasn't all bad, because Blackie was well known in the star-studded Hollywood club scene, and by 14, Kiedis had met such musical luminaries as Keith Moon, Led Zeppelin, and Alice Cooper.
My friends were so mystified by my growing up in a household where the parents were kind of like my best friends instead of parents.
Back at Fairfax High, they met another troublemaker, Israeli-born Hillel.
I was always expected to be a part of the family business.
A bank manager.
But
I was born to be.
The phenomenon known as the Red Hot Chili Peppers had its beginnings in the late 70s in the City of Angels. At LA's Fairfax High School, two teenage outsiders, Anthony Kiedis and Michael Balzary, began a lifelong friendship.
The universe, gave me this friend, and it wasn't a friend that you get for a day or two or a week or two or a year or two. It seems to be a friend that you get for life.
They shared a rebellious spirit and an affinity for landing on the wrong side of the law. Both boys came from broken homes. Michael Balzary, born in Australia, moved to LA when he was 11 with his mother, sister, and jazz-playing stepdad. Anthony Kiedis moved to LA when he was around the same age, coming from Michigan to live with his divorced dad, John Kiedis, who also went by the name Blackie Dammit.
I grew up in Michigan until I was 11, and I used to visit my father in the early 70s, late 60s, and the early 70s. It was such a dynamic place to visit my dad. I was like, wow, this world is just booming with magic and intensity, and I was so attracted to it when I finally moved there, and it's quite a lot to handle as a young man.
Having been born in the Midwest.
Together for 23 years. They've kept their vision despite great adversity, death, depression, addiction. These guys have seen it all. They found salvation in music and brought their lewd and funky gospel to the masses. They share a love of sunshine, tattoos, and tube socks. So the question is, how did this irreverent gang of four go from attending after-school detentions to throwing after-show parties? The Red Hot Chili Peppers were born to be.
My mother always wanted me to be a lawyer.
A doctor.
An architect like my father.
My dad insisted on medical school.